Y'all, today we need to talk about something that you might either find terrifying or incredible. In the most recent level 180 update, Wizard101 did a massive change to damage pins. What are damage pins, you might ask? They are jewels that give off-school damage. So we're talking about things that you would affix to your sword sockets on your gear. And basically the nature of this pin update was to make it so that higher damage per pip schools could be more rewarded for dueling into lower damage per pip schools. Think about a storm dueling into life. You want the storm to still have a lot of damage output because they're still very low accuracy, very low resist, very low health. And during test realm, I think they listened to a lot of feedback and balanced it pretty well for level 180. However, at level 50, things have gotten kind of crazy. And I think this is a big oversight because a lot of people forget that there's even pins at level 50, but I'm right outside the Malister dungeon. And yes, for all the reagents that you get in the Malister dungeon, you can make sword pins that allow you to get extra damage to other schools. You can also craft gear at this crafter that gives you access to the sword sockets that you need to affix all of these jewels. And this is a part that either is incredible or terrifying. People have already started experimenting with it. I have a feeling that this update has straight up broken things at level 50. So big shout out to this man's Nikolai on Reddit, but these are his stats as a storm. He is able to actually hit at level 50 over 200 life damage. Now, if you're wondering how all of this is possible, he also, did the little drop down, like he took a screenshot of it. So basically, as y'all can see, the vast majority of all of this off-school damage is just coming from sword pins that are made for level 50. They give over 25 life damage to Storm. And y'all can tell by the sheer number of sword pins, but also this is true for all pieces of gear at every level, right? There are ways to get up to 6 sword pins on a given gear set, which means for each of those pins that you see that give 25 something damage, you could get 6 of those, which kind of explains why a level 50 could even hit 200 damage for any school. Now, as if all of this wasn't enough, this legend, and I will call him that because this is pretty cool. He also posted screenshots of a dual school setup where he's running tons of fire damage, over 200 death damage. And while I find all of this very, very interesting, honestly, this is probably a way for you to level lock at level 50 and literally tackle every challenge in the game, which is actually pretty cool. While I find that part actually very intriguing, I think it raises the bigger question of whether school identity has been dismantled even earlier than ever before. And I think the topic of school identity really boils down to the fact that you want your choice at the beginning of the game to actually feel like it matters throughout the game. And right now, I would argue that you barely even get a feel for it after the first arc. And now, with this little pin change, it feels like it's done at level 50, as in there is no need for school identity at level 50 anymore. Here's where I think the root of the problem is, and I think a part of this is a little bit psychological from the player's perspective, right? They see update after update after update come out where their school seems to matter just a little bit less. I think a lot of this started with the Archmastery update, and to really be honest, this goes all the way back to Novus, which is when all of this was like introduced. But really the fact that even before level 50, you could actually pick a pip as long as you have access to Archmastery and you have mastery for that pip. That's already a very, very powerful mechanic. And then they added this weaving stuff last year where you could actually essentially choose a school to have secondary mastery over. And for doing that, you get access to all kinds of things. Namely, I would argue, dual pierce jewel, right? In advanced combat anyways, this was the last thing that people needed to literally be able to do almost, if not the same amount of damage with another school as their main school. And now with this pin change, you have Storms being able to put on a pin and just have insane damage, right? At max level, it's actually normal now to see damage pins give over 40, sometimes over 50 damage per sword pin. Now, they did think about this and made it so that in advanced combat, it's not like so overbearing. I think the fact that it starts so early now at level 50 is crazy. 200% damage used to be a thing that you actually got at max level, and now you could just get it as a level 50. And the only real trade-off is that you have a little bit of less HP, a little bit of less resist, stuff that matters even less at a level as low as level 50. The changes in HP and resist really start manifesting even later in the game, so I think that kind of creates a real imbalance. I'm gonna say this from a game design standpoint, because it doesn't affect advanced combat as well. If y'all don't know, they have like really, really strict stat caps that prevent you from doing too much. I'll be honest, I don't really know how all of that works at level 50. if this is just something you could just run into for PvP, there's no point in being anything but a storm, because you could just be a better fire, a better death, a better life than anybody that you're fighting, right? Which I think is a little crazy. But I think the underlying principle of this change is that you're supposed to do around 90% of the expected damage output for your school with another school. That 90% number, I think that's where the problem is. I think that works great at max level, but the game just isn't designed at low level for everyone to be running around with 200% damage. And probably the most vital point to keep in mind when we're talking about this 90% number, it is made for advanced combat. Advanced combat, as you can tell by the no PvP symbol on Enchants, is balanced around no enchant. So not only can you just end up getting more than 90% of your damage output at like level 180 as soon as you enchant something. This problem gets even crazier when you think about the fact that enchants at lower level are even more disproportionately better. As in, let's say that you enchant a Stormlord, right? Something you might use at higher level. Right, at 300 enchant on this, you're looking at like, oh, it's 50%, it makes the spell 50% better. But when you're talking about the types of spells that you would use at low level, an enchant makes a spell 100% better. So you're looking at enchants being a better buff at lower level by percent. And also now you're adding all this extra off-school damage with sword pins. That's why I think that 90% number, while on paper it looks great, the second you throw in enchants and the second you start introducing these values at low level, I think it starts breaking a lot of the game. I think it should start at like, you could do 60% of your damage output at level 50, and then it scales all the way up to level 90 or maybe even 100% at max level. Right, between 50 and 180, there's 130 levels, so I would argue that that would be an incentive to level up, and you would get a gradual increase in the reward for dual school. And I think that really lines up with the fact that most of the game, you don't need to really dual school, and in fact, you're only really rewarded for dual schooling once in a blue moon as you go further into the game. That is one way to look at it, as in, this is a problem. This is literally dismantling a part of the game. Once you hit level 50, there are ways to make it so that every single school is just worse than Storm dueling into that school. But I can't help but think there's also a part of me that actually likes this change, in the sense that, wow, something is possible on Wiz that you never would have thought. It's not like it affects any competitive part of the game, so why bother changing it? And here's the thing, I think that argument is also valid. Let's say that you look at this as purely, oh, it's cool, this is just a cool build in PvE. Well, that is great. I definitely think that means they need to go back and audit some of these fights so that they're challenging, so that those stats can feel like they're really being pushed to the limit. Right, what is the point of having such good stats if all it does is just make everything mad easy, right? Doesn't this mean that at level 50 and beyond, there should be regular intervals where you do hard fights for maybe cooler rewards? I'd say the hardest challenges, even if you're soloing at that level range, are things like Waterworks, Zigzag, maybe Tartarus if you want to go to the higher level range of that, you know, part of the game. And here's the deal, y'all. I've done this now, so I can tell you definitively, those are challenging to solo, yes. They're challenging when you do it on your own school with your own stats. I'm pretty sure with stats like 200% extra damage to, like, you know, an off school, I really think, especially things like Waterworks and Zigzag, they become a lot easier, especially when you start throwing in things like crit, which are also, that's available at level 60. And considering how much people complain, and rightfully so, about things like spell elements, things like, you know, even reagents to craft a lot of the things that are later in the game or good for your level, people complain about that, and yet they very rarely have ways to get really good stats, be challenged for having those stats, and get those drops, right? Imagine at level 50 or level 60, you could actually have a way to use these stats to farm for spell elements and still, like, encounter a challenge. I think that type of thinking would be great if they're not going to change this, which they don't have to, obviously. But definitely, all in all, I saw this on Reddit, and to sum it up, I really do have mixed feelings about this. I think it's either really broken and OP, and it makes the choice that you made at the beginning of the game extremely irrelevant, or it's not broken, but there aren't any challenges that fit the needs of a setup like that, which makes it kind of crazy. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on dual schooling, school identity, now that we have this update to pins, what y'all think about the fact that you can get 200% damage to other schools on a storm as early as level 50 now? I think we're really in the beginning of a meta where a storm can just get to level 50, get a very, very cheap AoE like Rat Spin or Ship of Fools, and just run 200% damage and just spam the AoE for everything. I feel like boss fights and minion fights included. Right, that kind of makes me feel a certain type of way, but that being said, it's so cool that I almost don't know if I feel negatively about it, and I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with this. Definitely a gray area, but I did want to cover it because I find it so interesting how changes meant for level 180 can literally maybe even break things at level 50, and I feel like people definitely care about that level range. Let me know y'all's thoughts. If y'all consider it a problem, how would y'all fix it? If y'all don't consider it a problem, what kind of challenges do y'all think would justify the crazy new builds that are now available? I look forward to reading all of y'all's thoughts in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave a sub if you're new, and as always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.